John.
I'm looking to buy a new bookshelf, Andrew.
Good.
About the same thing.
I've got the first thing, so I'll start. So this is related to what was on the demo the other week, which I missed, about how when we have low frequency metrics, counters in Prometheus, they will effectively start at 1 as far as Prometheus is concerned. And what that means is when you try and take a rate from them, you need 2 samples. You need that to go up to 2 before there's an actual rate, because Prometheus doesn't treat missing as 0 for good reasons. So you end up with, if it's low frequency, you might never get to 2 from a particular process scrape. And it might just look like the rate's 0 when actually it's non-zero. It's just that we didn't start the count at 0 each time. I think I'm explaining that right. So let me demonstrate the issue, I guess, and then share that. So this is the current state. So I only just started this Prometheus and the background process, so we can see it a bit clearer here. So I'm just running the workers for source code just to simulate a sidekick shard, even though that's not a real shard. So we see the update all mirrors worker just came from nothing to 1. Trending projects worker I scheduled manually also came from nothing to 1. So if we take rates of those, like, you know, the rate is the slope and there's no slope. Even when the first job happens, there's no slope when the first job happens, there is a slope as soon as the second job happens. So this only applies to low frequency things. So let me go fix that. So first of all, I'm going to stop Prometheus. I'll also stop Sidekick. And then I'm going to enable this feature flag I put it behind. I think it's possibly overly cautious to put it behind a feature flag, but I set the feature flag to enable by default to get around that, because the feature flag that I've added here will only apply on process start, because all it does is on process start find the potential values of Sidekick jobs completion seconds count, or sorry, jobs completion seconds, the histogram, that this process could run. So it doesn't generate a series for every possible Sidekick job. It just generates one for the Sidekick jobs that this process can run. What else do I need to do? I need to do something with Docker. That's it. This is my way of clearing my Prometheus data. Is in the GDK, it's stored in Docker, and I just delete all my Docker volumes. So I've enabled the feature flag. I'm going to start Prometheus. And then over here, I'm going to start. So this is, again, just starting all the source code management workers. So also we've got nothing here just for now. And then I'm also going to get ready to schedule a trending projects worker, but not do that just now, just to demonstrate that. So we'll need to wait for this to actually do something first before we get any metrics. I hope I did this right. So I might have done something wrong here, because I would have expected this to already be at 0. Am I on the right branch? Should be. Cool, good demo. So here we've got some jobs running. Oh, no, they're not running. They're dropped until dropped until executing because they've been deduplicated for some reason. Ah, there we go. Right. So I've got zeros for all the possible combinations of labels that this histogram could have for this process. So now if I go and schedule a trending projects worker and do that same query graph, we'll see that there's a bunch of zeros. Here's the update all mirrors worker, because that's a cron job, so that just runs regularly. And then once the trending projects worker runs and gets scraped, that will go from 0 to 1. So that should solve this issue, but I'm only doing it for one metric. And there's probably a bunch of low frequency metrics we have. Actually, I found one with the plan team purely coincidentally. They asked me about something that was related to service desk emails received, where they emit a metric when service desk does something, but service desk is, again, quite low frequency, and we've got a lot of Sidekick processes that can pick that up. So per Sidekick process, it's very low frequency that happens. So their rates don't match what they see in Kibana at all, because they're always starting at 1. Yeah, there's the trending projects worker, I think. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to the general problem there, because to do this registration thing, you need to know all the possible combinations of labels that you could have, because each combination of labels is effectively its own series. So for instance, here we have job status labels on this. We also have labels for the worker class and the worker queue. So we need all of those to match up correctly for this to do anything, because otherwise we just create 2 different series and then that wouldn't help. So I don't know if there's a better way to do this, or if it's just a thing we have to take care of. But yeah.
I mean, maybe we could, I don't know it very well, but we have some sort of wrapper class around Prometheus, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Rails code base. So maybe we could structure the API of that class so that when you create a metric, you must submit the possible label values. And
okay.
But then I guess that assumes that the metrics get defined at boot. Or
yes. Yeah,
which probably also isn't true. Yeah.
Yeah. This is also a good disincentive for people to add dynamic label values, which would be probably bad for cardinality anyway, because if you have dynamic label values,
yeah, like, dynamic is bad.
Then how are you gonna be able to like generate all the series at boot? So yeah,
that's the thing. In principle, you should be able to generate them at boot, but it's awkward, and because it's a dynamic language, we can't be sure it will happen at boot.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking of was like a more heavyweight approach where like you create a different type, like we have a registry of metrics that you want to create on boot, and then you use that constructor rather than the other constructor if you want one of those. And then, yeah, I don't know, I haven't really thought it through, but there would still need to be somewhere some code that says these are all the label values this metric can have.
Well, I suppose we could also do something obnoxious where if you try to define a metric that wasn't defined at boot, then we raise an exception, right? We could have something, an initializer where we say, now is the time you are allowed to define metrics, and then that changes. I don't know.
I mean, if you make it that we encourage people to do it through some sort of class method, kind of like the worker attributes, kind of where it's almost defined on the class, then that encourages that. Obviously, it's that people can get around it, but you know, if you make the API sort of like these are the metrics for this controller or whatever, then that might help with that.
I think it will. I think the other side of this coin is like, do we actually want to register all of them at boot? Because you know, cardinality is going to be an issue there. Like if they are low frequency at the moment, cardinality won't be a big
But it is the worst case cardinality. So then at least you find out sooner that you have a high worst case cardinality than later.
Yeah.
That's true, but we also we will increase the cardinality for every series we do this for that isn't already basically generating every metric value, every label combination on every process already. So yeah.
One of those would be the request counter thing with feature category, not endpoint, status code, and HTTP method. If we did that for that one, we would be in pain because we did that once for that one.
And now we do it for.
But we almost do need to do it for that one, right?
Well, no, we do
because
it for.
We want to know
some combinations. Let me share.
Oh, do we do it for 500 or something?
Yeah, let me share. What we do. Right. Apparently, I lost my connection. So we do something in here. Oh yeah, so we do it for the top
right.
few feature categories, because when we did it for every feature category, that caused a big problem. And because we have this like product for product thing where we have per method, per status, per feature category, it gets real big real quick.
And Andrew, for the one because we use this for errors, we get around it by recording a 0 if it's missing in the recording in the intermediate recording rules.
So it does a division by 0 because the error rate goes up, but the total rate doesn't go up, or what's the?
I think because we have more successful requests than failures, so sometimes we would have an operation, but the failures would not be recorded, and that would, like, it needs to be a 0 on the top there.
Yeah.
But
a division by 0 is a 0 on the bottom.
Yeah, well, I don't think we had a division by 0. It was
okay. Because it's error rate, not because it's success rate, right? So errors are on the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we were including a series that we didn't want
mathematics, and now we're talking about on the top and on the bottom of a fraction. It's good. Good to get different levels here.
So just one kind of broader question is like, would it be better if we just said we're going to do this properly and we're going to have all the combinations, we're going to preload, and we just accept that soon we're going to have to start sharding Prometheus much more aggressively than we're doing at the moment, and having lots of Prometheus instances, and then we can do things properly and we don't have to do that sort of slightly strange like combination code.
Well, what about, I'm curious about this recording rule idea, because it is kind of silly that we create this combinatorial explosion where the pods also push up the cardinality and the processes that we really don't care about, and the recording rules filter out stuff we don't want. So is there a way we can inject the zeros at the recording rule level and only work from there?
That would be nice. That's something that's really frustrated me as well, is like, the metrics generated by the application can have quite high cardinality. And then when you apply them across our fleet, we get a multiplication again of something that we don't end up caring about a lot of the time once it's passed
it's just a side effect.
Gone into Thanos. Yeah.
It's a side effect of the Prometheus architecture where it's a pool model and these things must have
a label for where they're being pulled from. Yeah. I don't know, Andrew? So
are you saying that basically the recording rule recognizes that something was absent and then has become 1 and then sets up a rate for that, like basically does something not a rate? I
suppose the problem is the recording rule doesn't know what label values exist, but the code knows.
Yeah, you need the custom function, I think.
Isn't it that if I remember correctly, when we wrote some of those rules, if there is an operation, if there's an operation rate that is higher than 0, we'll record a 0 for the error rate. It's something like that we had, I think, and that was for stuff like GitLab components, like those aggregating rules.
Well, the problem is that we even have things where the operation rate is too low. Didn't we have a cron job that was always failing, but it was so infrequent that we didn't notice? So if we then say the metric exists because of the operation rate, then we still wouldn't have got it.
So
that would be a case where it goes like just from nothing to 1 and then never goes to any other value, and then there's no rate at any point because there's no numeric change.
If you created a function, like imagine like it's alternative reality that'll never happen, where we fork Prometheus and we created a new rate function which said that if it goes from absent to 1, then it has a rate of, it assumes that absent is 0. Would that solve the cardinality problem and fix all of our woes?
Maybe, but I didn't read the full GitHub issue about this that's closed, about like having it assume 0. But as far as I understand, there are good reasons for not doing that. So it would probably give us other problems
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the solution that seems obvious that you can't do is that if you summed them before taking the rate, then that wouldn't be a problem because you'd be aggregating across the fleet into one place.
Yeah.
But that's also a thing you can't.
That doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't work.
So
yeah.
Um,
I mean, the other way to kind of consider it is, and this is something we've discussed before, but maybe the way to get around all these cardinality problems is just to have a really boring metric, which is in the application, SLI successes and SLI total requests, and it's got no other dimension. Well, the only dimension it's got is basically the service level indicator component.
Yes, I think that's the ultimate answer that we probably need for anything. That
terrible for debugging, but
to reduce the cardinality to the point where we don't care about pre-initializing everything.
Yeah, it's basically all we have is we don't need the recording rules anymore because the application effectively emits them in the aggregated state. So we've discussed this before, but
yeah, I think it's better. But is it?
It's
how do we
terrible
get there?
for debugging? Well, I mean, from a getting their point of view, it's not, you'd have to have a middle. It was discussed in that service level monitoring V2 proposal at the bottom. There was a sort of thing on it where you could just sort of have a yield block if you want, and you just sort of said, this is my success criteria. And then, when it comes out of that block, it just counts the counter, and that's it. And it just has no labels. It's really nice for us and for error budgeting, but from a application developer's point of view, it's not, they want to go and start looking into the dimensions and understanding, what was it, a 302 or 304?
But that's what logs are for.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the way you go with it, right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. I think for the service desk thing, like for anything that we're alerting on, that probably is a way to go. I think for the service desk thing, it's more arguable because it could become a metric that they're alerting on, but at the moment it's like they're trying to use it as an informational metric, but they can't because it's so infrequent. So, I mean, maybe the answer is make that an SLI in the end.
If it's an informational metric that's infrequent, then we only care about the ones that give us problems with alerting, right? If a development team wants information about something that never happens, then it's not the same thing as a cron job that doesn't run.
I mean, Never's got an asterisk here. This happens quite a few times an hour. It's just spread out like across different Sidekick processes, and that means that the individual series that with the full label combination tend to just don't exist and then go away.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is that we have what I'm hearing here is we have different use cases for Prometheus. So one is alerting, one is error budgets, and one is I'm a developer out and I want to see if a random thing happened in production with the counter. And so we can take different strategies for these different use cases. And for error budget and alerting, we can choose to be as economic as possible in terms of number of series we create. And that doesn't mean that if developers want to track something with a counter, they still can. And if they want to have fine-grained detail, they have logs.
Yeah, I think it also does apply to SREs as well, though, like especially in incidents, like, yes, you can use logs, but I think it would be useful to have more than the absolute bare minimum of detail in the metrics too, especially as...
There's one other sort of side effect of having that sort of richer API with the service, and I mentioned that in that proposal a long time ago, but you can make sure that your logs and your metrics are perfectly correlated, right? Because you could effectively emit a log on every service level failure, and you could make sure the logs absolutely have the same labels as the metrics, right? And so you kind of force that correlation. And so when a metric starts tanking, it's very easy to say, at the moment there's kind of a little bit of magic where we kind of look at the thing and then we know where to go in the logs. But with this, it's just like this SLI is tanking, and we know that when it's tanking, it starts writing logs that have got the exact same labels on them, and then we can search for those logs and help with the diagnosis of the problem. So in that way, it could be easier for people to kind of get that detail. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm just wondering, like.
Well, I think we started off with you saying, Andrew, that
Yeah.
it's bad for debugging, and now you're saying this is good for debugging.
It's good for debugging.
Well, we could make it good for debugging. We could work around it, right? Is sort of my point. But it just wouldn't be metrics; it would be logs, probably.
Yeah, my feeling
or traces.
Like, we've got this MR. Gonna see how that goes. Like cardinality wise, like ease of use wise. Then I might speak to the product planning team about their service desk metrics and see, like, if we do the same thing there, what does that look like? Does this look like a thing that we could reasonably generalize, or does this look like something where we just want to do it differently, have a different approach after all?
Sorry, silly question, but what are service desk metrics?
Sorry, the metrics that the product planning team have created for service desk that they asked me about that had the same issue where they were infrequent and the rates didn't match Kibana because of that.
Is service desk something that teams use internally, or is that a feature?
Oh, sorry, it's a GitLab. The GitLab feature, service desk, has some metrics that it emits.
And then users consume those metrics.
No, the team consumes those metrics.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, right. So, okay, yeah. So that is but that's not for alerting purposes. That's for informational purposes. Like, how do people use our feature?
Yes.
Yeah. So that sounds like it's the example of completely disconnected from error budgets and alerting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but we still need to support that case because
I think they do want to alert on it somehow, like if this job starts failing or whatever, because they are so infrequent, it does count, doesn't it?
Yeah, we could. I mean, we should alert anyway if those jobs start failing, but we might not if they're infrequent because of it,
Right, but I think the way okay, what sounds to me like the best idea right now, and maybe that's just the way I read the conversation, but the best idea sounds like yes, initialize everything at 0, but at the same time do the best we can to push down the cardinality by going to the most Prometheus friendly model for the case of alerting, so for the case of SLIs and error budgets. And outside of that, people can do what they want as long as they don't use too much space on the Prometheus server. And another advantage of this, and I'm sure
John, you were muted.
Oh, I was just saying, I think those two go together. Yeah, if you're going to pre-initialize metrics, the cardinality does need to be as low as possible. Yes.
Yeah, and so eventually it'd be good if we could just, or maybe it would be good if we decide that we want to get there at some point where we just have the lowest possible cardinality. And the other benefit that's in the back of my head is that once we count things in the application, that also means you can put limits in the application. And
that's exactly what I was just about to mention as well. Yeah,
and I think this is from my limited view, this has been a pain point already with error budgets, that the stage groups say, well, this thing is allowed to be slow because of X, and then we have to say, well, but the recording rule says it's not allowed to be slower than that, so go fix it, which is slightly inflexible, and it doesn't quite feel right.
There's an issue for that on switching the way we do that now, for like the whole thing for AppDex, to switch that from histogram to counters, which
is a variation of this, right? It's
yeah, but then you can put the threshold in the application. They define this method has 5 seconds to complete, and this one only has 1. Like, we need to keep an eye on it, but it can be there.
We should just make sure that we do that in the broader context of doing that for everything, it's
not just AppDex, but
exactly,
like all these things that funnel into SLIs and error budgets should pre-aggregate as much as possible.
Yeah, I think
that's Go ahead.
Yeah, and if we can do that, we can start doing it with, correlating the logs and the traces soon as well, hopefully. But the one thing I thought you were going to say, Jakob, but actually you meant a different thing, was if we start pre-initializing the values, we can also have CI checks to make sure that we can give people limits on the cardinality that we allow on metrics, because we can say, pre-initialize and give us all the values that you expect for this thing, and oh no, multiplying those all out, it's too high, and then they'll say, well, we really need this, and then we can go back and give them an exemption, or we can say, do you really need it, or can you use logs for that?
It's an interesting capability, but is this a problem we run into in practice already? That
No,
people
probably not.
generate too many, and then we have to go back and say, you know what, you made too many metrics
Only
here.
very occasionally, but it does happen from time to time. Yeah.
Usually we do it.
I think, yeah, just about to say that's us.
Yeah, that's true.
But it just
would be nice if CI stopped us instead of.
I think what I like generally about this idea is that it just feels like using Prometheus the correct way, just by pre-aggregating more and not trying to hold on to your precious data on the Prometheus server. Like, you just need to count things and let go of detail. That's the philosophy of Prometheus.
But yeah, I mean, maybe we just skip the whole thing of changing the developer interface for adding metrics so that we can kind of push them to pre-initialize, and just leapfrog that to the point where on a class you can kind of pre-initialize your service level indicators for that class. So we kind of go next level.
We don't need to force developers to do anything, because we just realize that we are the developers who do the worst cardinality
You're doing
stuff.
all of that. Yeah.
So
yeah.
if we just say we change
yeah.
our SLI and our error budget metrics, then we've addressed the worst offenders, because it's us.
Yeah. Cool.
Sorry, I'm being a little bit of a troll here.
Shall we move on? I put this at the bottom, but I think somebody moved it up. Okay. So this came out of like several different conversations with different people. And so I thought that there was I felt while they were being had that scalability should kind of be included in the conversation. So now you are. But it came out of several things. So the first one, I think, that really kicked it off for me was that Craig Gomes opened up an issue about the value of the database peak performance issues. And there was like a lot of discussion on that. And kind of, I think where we arrived was that really to get the most effective value from it, the process needs to be that if infrastructure see a big problem and they see like something that's just consuming all of our CPU, the best thing for infrastructure to do is to kind of do the investigation and get to like an endpoint and a team in the stage groups that we can say, hey, this is a problem. And actually, when you do that, often you'll find that there's already an infradev issue for that thing. And then instead of having two issues that everyone's looking at, you've kind of got it down to one issue, and you can kind of say, there's various different teams in the company who now reporting this as a problem, and you can kind of really focus on the prioritization. And so that was where that came from. But then what came out of it was like, well, it's really, really difficult to do this. And I tend to agree. Like if you see CPU, then this is all tribal knowledge. So the next thing you'll do is you'll go to pgstat statements in Thanos, and you'll look for some patterns in there. And then you might go to the slow log, and then you might go select some stuff from pgstat statements with like queries to try and find the right query. And there's all of this magic that's happening along the way. And then you go to other Rails logs, and eventually you come, and it's very difficult, and it's very difficult for people to kind of grok all these different sources. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was that Jerry was saying it would be really nice if there was more correlation between the application and the database and what's going on in the database, which is kind of actually the different side of the same coin. And then the third part that Andreas was really talking about is the attribution on the tables and having feature categories for tables, which I think we spoke about in this meeting as well last week, maybe. Yeah. And so there's different sides. And so Craig opened up an issue, and because I've been thinking about it for a while, I kind of did this like really rushed sketch, and it reminded me when I wrote it down of that meme of the investigator with the board, and he's like, yeah, here's the 20 different things and the wires between them, because that's what that thing that I wrote on there was like. But basically what I've done, let me share my screen maybe, is we've got 2 parts of that already done since yesterday, which is quite cool, I think. And I'll just explain the issue quickly as well. So really what we can do, one of the big problems that I see is that kind of we all talk about the query IDs because we have that in Thanos, and so people say, oh, we know that this query ID is is problematic, but the only people that can translate those query IDs into SQL statements are DBREs and people who can access the primary database, and so it's not a very friendly interface. It's not very democratized, and people can't get there. So what I propose is that we provide people with a way to map from a query ID to a query, right? And I played around with various different things, and then I realized that the easiest way to do this would be with a Fluent plugin that occasionally polls Postgres and says, what are all your query IDs? And what are the queries for those query IDs? And then also, because we can do it now, we can say, what are the fingerprints for those queries? So we use this library called pgquery, and it's got a thing called fingerprint, and it looks at the AST of a query and it generates a fingerprint. And we're starting to use that as our unique ID for a query. It's not that good because if you have queries with different number of question marks in an in clause, they're different queries, but it's good enough. And so what that will do is we'll poll the database, and then we'll put that into Elk, and you can basically log into Elk and you can look up a query ID and you'll be able to get the query. And so developers will be able to do this off the bat. And I put together a little merge request for that. It's like pretty straightforward. It's just a little plugin, and it just polls, like, I think I've got it set to every 5 minutes because there's 5,000 queries, so it's quite big. And so I don't want to do it too often, and it doesn't change that often. So once every 5 minutes, I'm sure is fine. But yeah, if anyone wants to go and mock my terrible Ruby, this is a good place to do it. But Stan's already had a go at it, so that's cool. And then, so that will give us a way. So instead of always just talking about query IDs and kind of struggling to map that to actual queries, we've got that. Then the second part of it, which I think is going to be really interesting, well, I think could be really interesting, is doing the same thing with pgstat activity. And what we can do there is we already occasionally polling pgstat activity, and we built this thing called the PG marginalia sampler.
What's in pgstat activity?
pgstat activity is a view of the current running things in Postgres. And so it says right now at this moment, and so obviously we can only sample it really. It's not really any good for kind of constantly understanding, but it's a useful sampling data source. And so we've had this thing called the marginalia sampler for quite some time. And effectively what it does is it collects, maybe if I just go back to here and I go into here, this might explain it a little bit. Deep links in GitLab. So what it does is the marginalia sampler looks at pgstat activity, and because we have marginalia at the beginning of every, this is the query here. I can see you craning. Let's see if that works. I don't know if you can read that, but effectively what it does is it looks at pgstat activity, and because we prefix all of our queries with marginalia now, we can do really horrible regular expressions which parse the marginalia and then tell us that right now there's 10 queries that are running that are for API v4 jobs request. And there are 5 queries that are running at this moment that are for this endpoint. And of the ones that are for API v4 jobs request, they're all in like lock contention state. So we kind of get this sample, and because it's just a Postgres exporter query, it just runs every 15 seconds. But I've found this this view to be pretty useful. You've just got to kind of treat it with a, you know, as what it is. It's a once every 15-second snapshot of the database. But like this was some time ago. So oh wow, this was from when we were having the real database troubles. It just was what came out. But you can see here, this was a time series, and then this was obviously during an incident, and you can see that the number of active queries for projects ID kind of spiked up to 114 active connections on the primary database that were for that data. And then I just kind of break it down here. You can see that's it was actually 180 at one point, so that's not good. And you can see what they're doing. You can see that a lot of them were idle in transactions, so that's kind of a bad thing. And it's just this sort of view that you can break things down. And so how that ties into this is that it gives us, what we can do is we can take that technique of sampling like every 15 seconds, and we can extend it by saying we carry on using the marginalia, but we will also take the query ID from the query and we will fingerprint it with the PG query fingerprinting technique. And then we can say that this query with this query ID is called by these endpoints, or at least we've sampled it and we see that that happens a lot because we'll record that in the logs as well. So we can say, you know, we saw this query a lot, and 95% of the time it was API v4 jobs request. And, you know, we don't always know that. And where this will come in like really, really helpful, for example, there was an issue where someone was saying that we were making too many queries to this query and no one could decide whose problem it was. It was kind of like a users table. And so people were like, well, it could be a cookie. And there was a lot of kind of fighting about it. And the theory was that there was one endpoint that was kind of coming in and really smashing that, that query, but there was no way to kind of do it. And so we thought about extending this marginalia sampler and looking for that exact query and then kind of reporting on it. But this would just be a general technique for that, and it's based on the fingerprinting. So this over here has been done. Hopefully it'll get merged today. This we are like, it will be kind of about as straightforward, I suspect.
Didn't Stan already do that? Or was that for something that wasn't?
Pardon?
Stan already did something that did marginalia in Fluent D. But
that was for slow logs.
Oh, okay. Right. Thanks.
Yeah. And so it's actually, it's in the same project, and it's, so the difference, so slow logs is great, but the problem with slow logs, as you know, is that there's lots of stuff that is very fast, but very high traffic that doesn't come out in the slow logs. And, and we don't get any attribution on that. So this is kind of a way of saying that this query belongs to this team, and we can do that. And then the third bit, basically, this is kind of just like my wish list of all time, which is like, if we just enable distributed tracing in production, like so much of this stuff will be easier. And actually, weirdly, Igor's just enabled tracing for Gitterly, but using Google's Stackdriver tracing, which isn't very good, but it's better than nothing. So we're slowly making things there because we have the requests in there. But then the last bit, which Stan has just done, because it wasn't very hard, is that he's taken, when we do a trace and we include the SQL of, so let me just open this up here. In the trace, we include the SQL, but the SQL is not very searchable. What he's done is he's put the fingerprint of the SQL into the distributed trace. So then you've got like everything, right? You can go from a query, you can go for something in pgstat statements to traces that are generating that. You can go to endpoints because you know what the endpoints are, and you've really got like full connectivity, or much better connectivity between like what's happening in the database and what's happening in the application than we've ever had before. Because we can just say, we know that this query was really bad. We know that this query is equal to this fingerprint. We know that this is the SQL. We know these are the endpoints that use it. And here's some traces that are actually generating that exact query. So it should help people. So let's just take a look at this, for example, just to give a quick demo. So here's a query, here's a SQL query. So that's the SQL that was issued to the database. And obviously this is kind of a bit difficult to grok, but we'll be able to add, so what Stan's doing is he's adding he takes this and he generates a fingerprint from it. And then we will be able to search traces by fingerprint. And so if we have a database problem and we see like a major spike in CPU, we should be able to tie that back to like traces and endpoints very quickly. I don't know if that's all kind of like still that crazy guy, like, great, I understand it all, but if that makes sense or not.
I think the exciting part is the distributed tracing part. Like,
Pardon me?
I think the exciting part is the last part about the distributed tracing. Like I was talking to Igor a bit about this yesterday, and even if it's just the
what makes this, sorry, Sean,
the Google Cloud version that's not quite as useful, that's still a big step to have that enabled.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What makes it difficult to put distributed tracing in? Is it just a case of time?
It's the thing that's difficult is finding an infrastructure person. But actually, like I think we should just do the Google thing, and then people will get the understanding of it and be able to, I think we should just use Stackdriver and just accept that we don't have people to focus on these things. And, we haven't got we've literally been trying to do this for a very long time, and it just keeps getting pushed back, and we should just do it now with Stackdriver.
But the pushback is that maintaining the infrastructure is too much work, the tracing infrastructure.
No, the pushback is that we never finish the work, right? Like it's always lower priority than the super urgent thing that is happening right now. So it has been pushed back for 3 years, as far as I remember, because we just get to it and something more urgent pops up.
Sounds like it would be very worthwhile to somehow get it out there.
I think the easiest way to do it is just to get it in through the back door with Stackdriver tracing, and just accept that it's not great, but it's better.
Well, didn't you set it up in a way where the tracing backend is exchangeable anyway?
Yeah. So Igor is busy replacing. He has already started working on replacing the LabKit OpenTrace with a Stackdriver. I forgot what it's called now. The cloud Open Census is the name of the API that Stackdriver tracing uses. It was Google's alternative to open tracing.
And did that alternative become the standard, or is there still
no?
some
The
sort
standard
of tug of war?
is the standard is a third thing called Open Telemetry, but Stackdriver tracing does, as far as the last time I checked, it didn't support that. And so this is exactly why we built LabKit, right? Is so that this mess can be addressed. the good news is that when everyone adopts open telemetry, it is a much nicer API. Like the open tracing API is one of the nastiest APIs that I've had the experience of using as a developer.
If we can get something up on a screen that people can start using, and it doesn't matter what the API is, then we're in a better place than we are now.
Yeah, but having LabKit means that we can switch to that and drop it in. Yeah, so that's the only part. And I asked Igor about this morning, was whether Ruby has open census library, and he said that he thinks it does. Otherwise, that was the only thing I was kind of wasn't sure about. Because obviously, if that's the case, we lose a lot of the benefit because there's a big black hole of all the Ruby traces.
We don't want that, but it sounds like Igor is doing this. Is this something that one person can just do, or do we need to support him? Or
I think, I mean, check in with him. It's like, Igor's quite good at just competently getting through things and asking when he needs help. But like, it's worth asking whether he needs some assistance with that. But luckily, like, it's not that hard to add different endpoints or APIs to the LabKit side of things, because it's a very high level abstraction. So it's sort of like, like instruments an HTTP request, and then the inside, it's not like a low level API like open telemetry or open tracing or anything like that. So you can replace them fairly easily.
I think it's also one of those things where, as much as we'd like to help with doing this, we do also have like an awful lot in progress at the moment. And I'm always nervous to help with another thing. I think if this was something we were going to contribute to, we need more space before we can say yes.
I'm not suggesting we jump on this right now, but the fact that this has been stuck in development hell for 3 years and is not happening is
since Cape Town
is not good. And I think it feels to me like it's close to what we're also doing with error budgets. It's about helping the organization scale by helping developers making better choices about what's going, about how their software runs, making it easier for SREs to understand what is going on. If this and getting these tools to work right is a lot of work. I mean, just having something you can click on is step one, but then you find out that the data is deficient, has like holes or gaps. You can't correlate things, you can't find things, and you get things like these fingerprints that Andrew was talking about. So once you have it, you need to make it good, and you need to keep it good. And right now, it's not part of our mission statement, but it sounds like it's close to our mission statement, and it could maybe become part of it, I guess is what I'm saying. Not short term, but it just sounds like it aligns well.
This kind of tracing is something that developers have wanted, like, since we started removing the thing that Yorick added that I forget the name of now, but yeah.
GitLab performance metrics, or InfluxDB.
That.
But yeah, I mean, I think if we can get it into open tracing, I don't know what the costs or anything like that are, and there will be a lot of tuning, but it's a start.
Okay, so just to be clear, our mission is not to make developers happy. Our mission is to scale GitLab.com. What we do on the path to scaling GitLab.com, if that makes developers happy, that's great. But that's a secondary, third, ternary, or whatever.
Can we say that we make developers aware?
Okay. The second point is we also have the observability team, which is supposed to be driving some of these items. Specifically, tracing was supposed to be one of the items they'll achieve. And last I checked, they also had site reliability engineering in their title, right? Now, who am I to say? Like, I understand that there are like many other more important things that they need to handle. So what I would suggest here is figuring out with the observability team leadership, so they have leadership now, what their mission is, how does that align with the project that you're mentioning here, and if this is something in their remit, doesn't matter. If it is, then great, they're going to have to prioritize. If it's not, then if there is no owner of this, then we can discuss how this fits into our own mission. And now I understand this sounds like we are not prioritizing globally, but if you check out all the projects that the team has been doing, we've been maybe even over-optimizing globally, right? We have been doing a lot of things that don't really move the dial as much as we want it to move, even though the team has been doing a great job. So I would rather go through the being purposeful about this and making this a discussion between observability and scalability. And then if we take ownership, we know why we took it, rather than because they didn't manage to get it done in 3 years. Like, that would be my suggestion.
Point taken. And also, Igor is driving this and owning this at the moment. So it's kind of exactly that. It's
absolutely fine. We can then do a combined project. Like, none of that is a problem. It's more that if you continue going into a habit of taking over items from the SRE org because they are drowned by other work, I would rather figure out how scalability can make the platform better for them so they are not drowned in other work that is application related, than taking on the items that, and I know that there is like a dependency there, right? Like, how are we going to do this if we don't know, and so on and so on. And this is the part where we can discuss this a bit more, not discuss, but make a purposeful decision about this.
And now that there is an engineering manager there, the conversation becomes much easier because we have someone very specific that we can go to with these things now.
I'd be, for example, much happier if this team takes on the task of Gitly cluster on .com running at scale. That would be a much more interesting thing to me. Whether it can run at scale or not is a different question. But that's the question I would like answered, rather than like the tracing work, right? Because this has direct impact on the application, direct impact on our capabilities of scaling. And has impacts all across, not only on our platform, but other scale platforms as well. This was just an example. We have many others. Like, I can pull a couple of others from my hat, but I just came out of a discussion about Git cluster.
Cool. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, is that let's focus on the application side of it.
It's more focused on the application scaling side of things, right? And I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss this. So Rachel, maybe you want to take an action item here to figure this out with Ken, but at the same time, I don't want us to go in and just take on an item that they've been working on for a while.
Especially when we have plenty already.
Oh, do we? I haven't noticed.
Cool. Well, we've got 5 minutes left. Bob, do you want to show us tables? Or
yeah, with all the work that we've been doing, no, it won't even take 5 minutes. I was just like, it took longer than I thought it should have to write a line, a column. And that was because there's 2 kinds of tables in Grafana, and Grafana doesn't have the new one yet. But since it's just JSON, you can do whatever you want. That made me think if we maybe could upgrade Grafana, but I daren't start that yet.
Somebody actually, a friend of mine sent me a link to Grafana had a conference recently, and they had a talk on like new way to do declarative things. And because I think they're kind of realizing that lots of people are using this now. It started off as a bit of a side project. I'll try and find the talk. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet myself.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is going to be to switch over to when they, I don't know where it's at right now, but they were going to start doing the generated thing, right, for Grafana. So it would always be in sync with what Grafana can do now. But I don't
Yeah.
know where that's at.
I can't find that link either.
I don't have anything more on that. Grafana's funny.
Well, if there's nothing more to add, I'm going to thank you all for the time and the discussion, and I hope that you all enjoy a good Friends and Family Day tomorrow.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.